Biggest winners and losers from Sunday's action. Next on Fantasy Football Today in 5. Welcome to FFT in 5. I'm Chris Towers. I'm here with Adam Azer, and I was listening to the full episode of Fantasy Football Today before we recorded this. Adam, you were recording with Dave, Jamie, and Heath, and Dave said something along the lines of, this week was worse for injuries than most weeks. I kind of feel, it's becoming normal.
No,
Last week was worse than most weeks. It's been such a bad season for injuries. Obviously, look, the injuries that we had this week, significant. Justin Jefferson left in the first half of his first game back from IR. He did go to the hospital, has an internal chest injury, but he's traveling with the team. Kevin O'Connell made it sound like they avoided a worst-case scenario and they were feeling okay about where he was, but obviously we don't know what that means for Week 15. Joshua Dobbs was also benched in that game, so we don't really know what to expect from the Vikings offense moving forward. Alexander Mattison left that game with an ankle injury. Josh Jacobs left on the other side of that game with a knee injury. That's concerning.
This is that game, basically.
No, Nico Collins left with a calf injury. CJ Stroud left with a concussion. Obviously, I think, concussions, generally speaking, players tend to miss the next game after a concussion, but we don't know if that will be the case this week. Some of these are, we also had Justin Herbert leave with a fractured finger.
Yeah, that one.
I think that's all of the significant injuries that we have to talk about. It's a lot, and that's been a key thing for this season. Part of the problem is Herbert, short week, they play on Thursday. Josh Jacobs, short week, they play against the Chargers on Thursday. And Alexander Mattison and Justin Jefferson have a short week because they play on Saturday this week. That's a couple of extra days, but we do have 3 Saturday games this week, something to keep in mind for Week 15. And which injury do you want to talk about first, Adam?
Well, I think the most fantasy relevant one is Jacobs, just from in terms of going forward. Obviously, the Jefferson one is just terrible luck. It's really bad for all the Justin Jefferson managers, and hopefully he can come back. We don't know the severity, but for Jacobs, I don't really want to pick up. I'm sorry, I messed up. It's actually Madison that I think is more interesting. I don't want to pick up a Raiders running back, even in a great matchup. But I do think Ty Chandler is pretty interesting if Alexander Madison misses some time. So. Especially with a matchup at Cincinnati. So that would be a waiver wire pickup that I'd be looking at. And then I think, down the road, if Nico Collins misses the next month or something, then you could have Noah Brown. You could have a big boost for Dalton Schultz when CJ Stroud comes back. You're not going to trust anybody next week if CJ Stroud does not play. And then for the Chargers, you got Eckler coming off this really good game, but losing Herbert's going to hurt him, I think, for sure. It's going to hurt Allen. I think those are the only 2 guys you're going to be considering at this point.
Yeah, we did have a pretty good game from Quentin Johnston this week, but I don't think that was enough to change how we view him for fantasy, right? Let's move on to winners and losers from this week's action. Obviously, make sure you listen to the full episode of Fantasy Football Today for a more in-depth breakdown of every game, including winners and losers. Adam, who's your biggest winner coming out of this one?
Well, Dave said Matthew Stafford. I'll just say Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. These guys are rolling right now. And I think one of the things that we weren't talking enough about while Puka and Kupp were struggling was that the Rams were just not throwing the ball much. They went, I'd say, over a month with maybe no more than 32 pass attempts in a game. Well, they're throwing the ball a little bit more now, and it's great to see. Stafford in the last 2 weeks has put up the 3rd most fantasy points of any quarterback against Cleveland and the most of any quarterback against Baltimore, and they get Washington next. Washington, the Saints, and the Giants. This passing game might win you your fantasy leagues.
Yeah, Matthew Stafford, I thought early on in the season he was playing really well. It just wasn't showing up for fantasy. It was a lot of short Kyron Williams touchdowns rather than Matthew Stafford touchdowns, but he's got the touchdown rate back up over 4%. It was below 4% for most of the season. It was below 4% last season, so I think there was some concern that there might be some slippage there, but I think he's playing well. I really like the way the passing game looks right now. Cooper Kupp was running and winning downfield on routes, which is something that we hadn't seen in a little while, so I think it's all very promising for the Rams. Big winner for me, and it's kind of like a bittersweet winner, but it's Drake London. And I've done this with Garrett Wilson a few times this season where it's like, if you bet on Garrett Wilson this season, you were right. He really is that dude. Like, he is that good of a player, and it's been inconsistent production, and it's like the big blow-up weeks for him are 10 catches for 90 yards or whatever it was today, whereas like CeeDee Lamb's big blow-up games are 11 for 160 and a touchdown. And so, like, that's the frustrating thing. Drake London really is a very, very good wide receiver. He had a couple of unbelievable plays today, and it's just hopefully that situation gets better in 2025 or 2024, because I really want to see Drake London live up to his potential. But it was a nice reminder that he can still hit that ceiling outcome even in this offense. Let's talk about some losers. Who's your biggest for this week?
There's so many. I mean, this segment is sponsored by Gabe Davis, but not even him, but all the people who started Gabe Davis. I would say that Roshan Johnson is a big loser. He was the number one waiver wire guy 2 weeks ago, and now he had one touch. You can drop him again. Gus Edwards, I think the experience is just about over, but does Keaton Mitchell get enough work? No. So the Ravens backfield. So those are guys that really showed up to me as losers. Calvin Ridley was an interesting one. I think the fact that he got so many targets was encouraging. He almost scored again. I don't think he's a complete loser in this week. And I also just want to say Stephon Diggs. I know it was tough. I'm a big L'Jarius Sneed fan, another wide receiver that he did a great job against. The matchups are about to get a lot easier for Stephon Diggs, and you know how it is with wide receivers like this. They're going to do everything they can to get him involved, so I think he'll bounce back.
I will point out one. I just don't understand what the Texans running back situation is right now. Last week, it looked like they were moving back to Dameon Pierce. He got 15 carries this week. It wasn't even like Devin Singletary was getting just because they were trailing and they were throwing a lot. Devin Singletary ran the ball more than Dameon Pierce. So I think at the very least, Dameon Pierce is probably out of the starting discussion. Only 4 carries in this game. Devin Singletary had 13. There doesn't seem to be much rhyme or reason about who they go to when they do, but right now, if Davis Mills is starting next week, I think I'm just avoiding the Texans backfield, but I'm definitely avoiding Dameon Pierce for week 15 and moving forward. So that's going to do it for FFT and 5. We'll be back tomorrow to talk the week 15 waiver wire. We'll see you then.